Well, not really. Just first of all, sorry if we missed this session during your training. I'm happy that we managed to at least organize an online version of it. And it ended up being, in my opinion, a great opportunity to bring Benjamin on board on the training. And as I said, Benjamin is an amazing Ayurveda practitioner. He's the owner and founder of the Medicine Man in Potts Point, which is a little dispensary of Ayurveda. What would you say, Benjamin? Products? No, I don't want to
Yeah,
use the word
yeah, it's a herbal dispensary and clinic space. Yeah.
but correct me if I say anything wrong, Benjamin, but you also have clinic
Yes.
as part of your as part of the medicine men. So they do it all.
Yeah.
That's it. I'll pass it on to Benjamin, and Benjamin, word to you. If you have any question for me, please ask. Otherwise, I'm all ears.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. So I put together some slides for us to go through today. I find that visual kind of stuff really helps to land some of the some of the knowledge that we're going to be covering off. But it is a lot, and I've packed a lot of stuff in. And so if at any point it's feeling a bit overwhelming, you can let me know. If there are questions that you have, please feel free to ask them. If you're watching online and you'd like to follow up with anything, again, feel free to reach out. Either via the medicineman.com.au or through Alice can pass on your details to me. So I'm just going to share my screen with you guys so you can see what I'm seeing. Are you able to see that? Alice, do you have the presentation up?
No.
Okay, let's try that again. How about now?
Yes.
Yeah, you got full screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, amazing. So Ayurveda. I guess, first of all, I wanted to welcome everybody to tonight's session, but also to congratulate you guys on completing your teacher training, which is a big deal. I did my own teacher training back in maybe the early 2000s. And when I think back to that experience and how intense it was, during that sort of process, I know there were a lot of kind of breakdowns and breakthroughs for the people that were on my course. And it's a big deal, and to have stuck it out and to be at this point where you're attending your final kind of lecture. I just wanted to recognize that and tell you that it's a really exciting journey that you've got ahead of you. And I'm really thrilled to be able to add some Ayurvedic understanding to that. And I can say that, as somebody that was teaching yoga sort of from 2002 onwards up until kind of, not a couple of years ago, when I studied Ayurveda, it really changed my understanding of yoga as well. And it's not to say that you need both of those things, just that, they call them sister sciences. And having studied them both, I can see why that is, because they help to inform each other. The understanding of one really adds to the understanding of the other. And so today I'm going to introduce you to some of the foundational concepts of Ayurveda. It's a big topic. And I guess you will have already discovered, as we were saying earlier, that through your study of yoga, you realize that these Vedic wisdoms are enormous. You can study your entire life and never touch the sides. And so all of us are going to be students forever in terms of trying to understand the Vedic wisdom. And I found that whether it's, Ayurveda or yoga or the astrology aspect of the Vedic wisdoms, Jyotish, in my experience, it's best to kind of let the knowledge kind of wash over you. And just absorb what you can in the moment that you can, rather than kind of straining your mind to understand everything perfectly, taking down as many notes as you can. That's the way that I am as an individual. I like lots of notes and I like to really understand things. But I found myself challenged at different times, with Ayurveda and with yoga, because it's a different thing. It comes from a different time and a different place. And so it's ultimately a journey. And so it unfolds over time. And so I encourage you to kind of sit back and just listen and absorb. And as things, come to mind, feel free to ask those questions. But you'll find that, you reflect on things later. So you don't have to necessarily understand everything perfectly now. So you can take that pressure off yourself if you're inclined to sort of feel it. Just a little bit about me. As Alice gave me that lovely and generous introduction, I started the Medicine Man, which is kind of a wellness brand. We've got a dispensary and clinic in Potts Point. As I said, I've been practicing yoga for a long time. So I started back in the 90s over in London, and then kind of moved through to do my teacher training. I became aware of Ayurvedic medicine through my yoga training, and became really interested in that as a sort of medical sister science of the Ayurvedic practice, of the yoga practice. So sort of traditionally they say that yoga is about liberating the spirit, from the kind of the flesh, and that Ayurveda is about making sure that the flesh is as healthy as it can be and is, I guess, not an impediment to that journey. How to keep us in balance and how to kind of rejuvenate and lengthen the lifespan. I've been practicing in clinical practice now for coming up to 10 years, having studied at the Australasian Institute here in Australia with a very traditional doctor. So a lot of what I'll be sharing with you is based on the very traditional foundational concepts of Ayurveda, rather than one that's been, overly modernized. So in terms of what we'll cover off today, I wanted to give you just a quick overview of Ayurveda, just so that you get an understanding of, where this information is coming from and some of kind of the core foundations. I'll introduce you to something known as the 20 gunas, which is one of the most practical knowledges that they've kind of given us. It's one that you can apply to your everyday life, which is why I like to start with that for a lot of people, because, theory is one thing and theory is amazing, but it's really becomes particularly interesting when you can apply that to your own life in an everyday practical way. And so I'd like to take you through that concept. We'll touch on the what we call prakriti, or your constitution, which is based on the notion that every individual is different, and so every individual needs a slightly different approach to diet and lifestyle habits and their yoga practice. And you'll be able to see how that applies to you personally, but also to your students moving forward as we look through some of those differences. Then we're going to look at a really high-level overview of the way that Ayurveda approaches nutrition. So we have a really different concept of the way to be thinking about food. And in my experience and in my opinion, it sets people free. So if you've had a relationship with food that has been, challenging in the past, if you've kind of, struggled with your weight, if you found yourself, in strict kind of periods of denial or, binging, or this will set you free from a lot of that, because the way that we think about it is really different. And so I'm excited to share that with you. Then I've got just a few tips for living in balance, just from an Ayurvedic perspective, so stuff that you can think about moving forward. And then I've added just in the back end kind of a little bonus section on 5 herbs that heal, for those that have an interest in herbal medicine, which is, quite foundational to the practice of Ayurveda. So I just thought I'd start, with the people that are here tonight that are online doing this live. What comes to mind when you think of Ayurveda? Who's heard of it before? And what do you know about it? Feel free just to call out.
Like neti pots.
Yeah. 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 Part of the cleansing. Yep. Anything else?
To be honest, I don't know much about it.
Yeah. Well, then I'm very excited for you guys, because this is a whole branch of knowledge that I think you're going to love. And particularly if you've been drawn to yoga, I think you're really going to love, this sister science of yoga. And so I'll take you through some of the key things. So the definition that I've arrived at in terms of Ayurveda, what is Ayurveda, is this one up the top here. So a universally applicable system of health creation. So it's about creating health in the human body that can be applied universally. So it applies to everybody. In terms of its origins, the truth is we actually don't know a lot. Well, we do know a lot, but we don't know everything about it. So the origins have been kind of lost to history. But what we do know that is, to even get close to knowing, where this information came from, you'd have to go back at least 5,000 years to India to even get close. And so this was when the science of Ayurveda was written down. And prior to that, it had always just been passed on orally. So similar to Patanjali's sutras, there were a series of slokas or verses that were memorized by people over the course of their lives, and particularly within certain family groups. And then they would pass that information on through stories to each other. And we don't know how long that went on for. But what we do know is that 5,000 years ago, they wrote it down. And so that's the body of knowledge that we have access to now. And that's where most of, the things that we operate with in terms of yoga and Ayurveda are based on. So just for context, 5,000 years ago is about 3,000 years before the birth of Christ. So this is information that has been around for a really long time, and it's about 500 years before the pyramids were built, or the estimated date that the pyramids were built. And so the funny thing is, in modern, societies like ours, we tend to think of 5,000 years ago as being primitive. That the people that were living back there were primitive types. But in fact, there's been several golden ages, if you like, throughout history, where humanity's taken huge leaps forward in terms of their understanding of the universe before kind of regressing back again. And we know that through the dark ages in, kind of Europe and things, where there are periods of regression in human kind of development. And, scientists and historians still don't know how the pyramids were built. So this information comes from a different time and place, as I said at the start of this. But what it fundamentally represents is this universal, applicable system of health creation that originated in India, is over 5,000 years old, but it's said to be for all people and for all time. And so the question that I think is a really reasonable one to ask is, well, how could that be possible? How could something that was developed 5,000 years ago possibly be relevant to our lives now, when, back then they didn't have technology in the way that we have it. They didn't have the internet. They weren't traveling to other countries via airplanes in the way that we are. They weren't dealing with pesticides and mortgage pressures, and didn't have television and the internet, all this kind of stuff. So all the things that are impacting our lives now, how is it possible that something that was developed for the people living back then, when they didn't have exposure to those things, could be relevant to our lives now? And that's one of the first questions I asked when I started my journey with Ayurveda of my teacher. And what I've discovered, through that process of inquiry, is that in fact the rishis, we say, or which are the holy people of the time, that developed or received this knowledge, didn't develop a system of health creation at all. What they came to understand is how the entire universe works. So they understood the process of creation itself. And those underlying principles of creation are eternal. So they never change, which is why this knowledge is as relevant now as it was 5,000 years ago, but it will also be as relevant in 5,000 years from now, because the fundamental principles of creation never changed. And this is what they understood. As Ayurvedic practitioners, and in the science of Ayurveda, we apply that knowledge to the task of creating or maintaining health in ourselves and in our clients. And this is the science known as Ayurveda. So Ayurveda, as a word, is actually made up of two words joined together. So Ayo means life, and Veda means wisdom or knowledge. It's often called life knowledge, but actually I think life wisdom is more appropriate, because as we all know, there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is things that we gain from books, and wisdom is, when we truly understand, what we've read and how we apply that to our lives and how we come to understand that over time. And so this is really what Ayurveda is about. It's about understanding how the principles of the universe can be applied to us as individuals, and in particular, how we can use those principles to help maintain health in ourselves if we're already healthy, which, when we're young and oftentimes can just be luck. We just happen to be healthy rather than actively taking really specific steps to create that outcome. Or if you've moved into imbalance, if you've already suffered with illness, or if someone in your life that's close to you is suffering with illness, it gives you a bit of an understanding of perhaps some of the day-to-day things that could lead towards restoring balance in that person. And I think, given the context of when this knowledge was developed, it needed to be really practical, because people didn't necessarily have access to everything that we have now. And so that's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Our access to everything is partly what's creating our problems, the overwhelm of, all the information that we're constantly bombarded with. But it also gives us, the opportunity to use those tools in order to, bring balance to ourselves. So then, of course, what is this knowledge that they understood? What are these foundational principles of the universe that we can use? And the truth is, there are many. The Vedic body of knowledge is so vast and so deep that we would be here forever, and even then, we wouldn't be able to cover it, and certainly, as individuals, we probably would never be able to understand it all. But one of the things that is really valuable and really practical is the concept of the 20 gunas. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. And so as we talk through this, if there are things that don't make sense, because I can't see you, I can only see my screen based on the view that I've got at the moment, just call out if something's you want to clarify. So the gunas, or qualities, as we say in English, so the word guna actually means that which supports creation. So the 20 gunas are essentially the building blocks of life. And actually, they're just 10 pairs of opposites. So according to these rishis, so these ancient holy people, everything you can see in the universe is made up of different combinations of the same 20 qualities. And as I said, they're actually just 10 pairs of opposites. So you've got hot and you've got cold. You've got static, which is the principle of being able to move or movement, and static, which is stillness, and mobility, which is movement. You've got things that are wet or things that are dry. So just based on those three things, you can start to think about how you could be able to describe some of the things around you. Is it hot and wet, or is it cold and dry? You know, you might think about the weather. You can describe it in those ways. There's also sharp and dull as one of the other pairs of opposites. So sharp is an interesting one. We think about things having a sharp taste, and you think about cheese, for example, and actually on the packets of cheese in the supermarket, they will give it a rating in terms of how sharp the taste is. But we can also have a sharp pain, or we can have a dull ache. We can be dull-minded, you know, wake up in the morning feeling dull and foggy in the mind. So sharp and dull. There's heavy and light, which is fairly obvious. Soft versus hard, same thing, quite obvious. Subtle versus gross. This is an interesting one. Gross tends to be, very physical, very, present in the universe in a manifest way. Subtle is often things that are harder to see. So the wind, for example, has the principle of movement, but it also has the principle of subtlety, because it's not something that we can see easily. We can see the effect of wind, but we can't see wind itself, and that's partly because it's got subtle quality. But alcohol also has subtle quality. And when we use it therapeutically in Ayurveda, through the medicinal wine range that Ayurvedic practitioners use, the reason for that is that alcohol has the principle of subtlety, which allows it to penetrate into the bloodstream faster than if you were to take a herb, as a capsule, for example, that had to go through the digestive system, would take longer. And that's because the capsule of herbs is more gross than the liquid alcohol version that's more subtle. And so the benefit of using subtlety is that it can move into the bloodstream faster from a therapeutic perspective, for example. We've also got rough versus smooth, which is quite straightforward to understand. We've got dense versus flowing. And so all of these things are on a spectrum. So it's not either hot or cold. Hot and cold are the extremes of one spectrum. And static or still versus mobile are the two extremes of one spectrum. And that's the same with dense and flowing. So if we think about something like honey, for example, honey is flowing. You can pour it off a spoon, but it's more dense than water, for example. The last one is then cloudy versus clear. And so you can often, again, from a therapeutic perspective, if somebody's coughing up phlegm, if they've got, chest issues and they're coughing up phlegm, for example, then you might ask, is it cloudy or is it clear? And that gives us information about what's going on with that person. So these different combinations, in all the thousands of combinations that you could create from all of these, can be used to describe everything in the universe, everything in the manifest universe, which is interesting, right, in and of itself. But so what? Why is it so important to allow us to be able to describe things according to those 10 pairs of opposites? And the reason is that once you can recognize something, you can consciously respond to it. So being able to consciously respond to something as a concept can't be underestimated, even though it can be easily overlooked. And an example, just to maybe help kind of land that concept, that I really like at the moment is gaslighting, right? So up until the time that name came about, gaslighting in relationships where, you kind of deny somebody else's reality by telling them that, that's not how things are, when in fact that is how things are. So that concept of gaslighting is relatively new in terms of the term that was given to that set of dynamics that are happening in certain people's relationships. But without having the concept of gaslighting named, it was hard to recognize the dynamics that were going on. It was hard to understand the particular dynamics as they were playing out, particularly for the victim that was within that dynamic. Once that term was named, it gave people the ability to recognize a dynamic for what it is. And it's the same of all things. So we can use these 10 pairs of opposites to describe everything in our lives. And so if, for example, we were to think about popcorn, what kind of words would you use from that list that would spring to mind to help describe the nature of popcorn?
Light.
Yeah, light, dry. If we were to think perhaps about an avocado by contrast, what would that be? It's heavier. So it's heavy, it's a bit dense, it's oily. And so these things allow us to understand the nature of something. And when you can understand the nature of something, you can start to use that therapeutically. And the way that you use it therapeutically is based on two universal principles. So the first thing is that you need to be able to describe what that thing is according to those gunas. Then the second thing is that you can use that knowledge of something therapeutically through these two principles. One is like increases like. So if, for example, you eat a lot of crispy, crunchy, dry things like rice cakes and crackers and raw carrot sticks, all of those things are kind of light and dry and rough, it will increase the qualities of lightness, dryness, and roughness in your body. Or if, for example, you work in a hot kitchen with lots of steam, it will increase the qualities of heat and wetness in your body, right? So like increases like. But by the same token, opposites bring balance. So if, for example, you're feeling kind of scattered and overwhelmed and very ungrounded, you could choose to eat things, for example, that have the principles or the qualities of heaviness and groundedness, like root vegetables. Or if you had a weeping kind of wound, you'd want to start to dry it out. Or if you were on a cold mountaintop, trekking up a mountainside, would you rather have, a hot cup of tea and a warm soup for dinner, something kind of stodgy, a warm stew and a hot cup of tea, or some crackers and cold water, right? You want to be looking at the principles of opposites to bring balance and the notion that like will increase like. Does that make sense to everybody? I know it's a lot to take on, but does the basic concept feel like it makes sense to you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So on a really practical level, we do these things all the time, right? In terms of opposites bringing balance, if it's a cold, windy day outside, everybody puts on a jacket and wraps their neck in a scarf, right? Because they're bringing warmth and protection to balance out what's happening outside of themselves, right? Which is actually an unconscious attempt to maintain homeostasis in the body through the principle of opposites balancing. And same with like increasing like. When people start to get, when in the early days of maybe getting a bit of a cold or something, people will often be reaching for, hot ginger teas or fir soups and things like that. People will tend to naturally gravitate to the things because on a subconscious level, we know this information that like will increase like. So if I need to kind of heat myself up and try to, kind of sweat out a cold, then I'm often reaching just for hot, warm drinks. And this is before I studied Ayurveda. Everybody tends to do these things. On cold days, you kind of rug up. It's kind of basic human knowledge, but it goes beyond just those subconscious things when it becomes conscious. And the way that it becomes conscious is that you understand those 10 pairs of opposites as a way to categorize everything in the world. So once you look at, anything that's on your plate for dinner, you can categorize it according to these things. And you can decide whether those qualities are things you want to increase in your body by eating it, or if you need to actually switch it up. So if you are feeling really overwhelmed and anxious and ungrounded, having lots of crackers and skipping meals and things that are increasing lightness in your body doesn't help. You want to go the opposite way using the principle of opposites balancing to bring, groundedness and heaviness into your diet that pulls you down. But by the same token, if you're feeling sluggish and heavy and slow, then you want to lighten things up. So maybe you do skip a meal here and there to bring lightness to the body. Or maybe you do just have, salads, for lunch and dinner to bring lightness to the body. So everything you're doing is actually already a combination of those qualities. But once you become conscious of those qualities, you can use them therapeutically by applying these two principles. Either introducing the things into your world and your body that you want to see more of in yourself, so like increasing like, or by doing bringing the opposite of what feels like it's out of balance in order to bring that part of yourself into balance. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Alice, good for you? No, we might have lost her. Okay, so how can that help you map the world? So we've just covered this off a little bit already. 10 pairs of opposites can describe everything in creation, right? Here are the 10 pairs of opposites. We talked about popcorn, the properties of that. So light, dry, rough, for example. And so if you eat lots of popcorn, it's going to increase lightness, dryness, and roughness in your body. If you are having really dry skin and your hair's breaking and you're feeling like you're underweight, then having those qualities of lightness, dryness, roughness that are embodied by popcorn, for example, not very helpful. It also applies not just to the food we eat, it also applies to the place that we live, for example. So if you're living at, in a dark ground floor apartment that's surrounded by lots of trees, then the likelihood is that there's, the qualities of kind of wetness or dampness that's closer to you, impacting your kind of day-to-day life, maybe a bit of heaviness, maybe a bit of coldness. So the place that you're living in will also increase certain qualities in you by putting yourself within that environment, because like increases like. If on the flip side, you live in a top floor apartment, lots of, fresh air moving through the place, lots of, open windows and light coming into the place, then that will increase those kind of light, airy qualities in the body. And so if you're somebody that is prone to feeling a bit sluggish and a little bit, depressed from time to time, then living in a top floor bright apartment is good. Whereas living in a kind of basement apartment might make you feel worse. And the flip side, if you're somebody that, gets really kind of scattered and anxious and a bit overwhelmed easily, then maybe you need something that's a bit more grounded. So not on the top floor, but on the ground floor, and making sure that your apartment is, feels like nice and cozy. So you can use these principles in all parts of your life. So it applies to the food that you eat. It applies to the place that you live. But it also applies to the weather and the environment. So we live here in Sydney, and Sydney, is prone to having good summers and, fairly mild winters. But if you were living in a different city, then the weather outside that is going to be impacting you as well. And so depending on, the qualities that you require to balance your own self based on your constitution, which we'll get to, will either be helpful or less helpful, right? Depending on where you're living. And that's the last one of these things, is that these qualities are applicable to your own personal body. And this is where the knowledge of constitution comes into Ayurveda. And so we say that everybody's born with a different ratio of these qualities at birth. And whenever they maintain that kind of ratio, it helps them to stay in balance. But all the things that we're doing in our lives, depending on where we're living, what we're eating, what the weather in the city that we live in is like, what season we're in, is all affecting the balance of those things in our body all the time. And so we can either just be victims of that, where we just kind of roll with the punches and, kind of do the best we can, or we can learn to recognize how these different things are affecting our body and take conscious steps to try and bring it into balance. Still with me?
Yes.
Okay. So just to take that slightly one step further, but stay with me. So if you're familiar with any kind of the traditional medicines or philosophies, whether that's kind of Asian, Chinese medicine, or Ayurveda from India, or even Western medicine, you might have come across the concept of the 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and we say ether in Ayurveda, or space is the 5th one. So these are the 5 elements that make up, the universe from an Ayurvedic perspective. But those 5 elements are actually just convenient names for groupings of the 20 qualities that we were looking at before, right? So when we talk about space or ether in Ayurveda, what we're really talking about is the qualities of light, dry, and cold. If we're talking about air in Ayurveda, it's the qualities of light, dry, rough, cold, and mobile. and so on and so forth for the others. If you look at earth, we're talking about heavy, cold, dense, dryness, grossness, stability, hardness. So these things are just convenient names that we can use as practitioners, but also that helps you understand, the principles or the qualities of fire or earth or water, because they are simply names that are given to groups of qualities. And as I said before, those qualities which inform the 5 elements of earth, air, fire, water, and space come together in Ayurveda in different combinations to create what we call Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And so when you're born, you're likely one of these 3 body types, or a combination of 2. So just to be clear around this, technically everybody is made up of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So we're all 3, but the ratios differ, right? So people that are Vata, predominantly Vata, which is actually meaning that they're made up mostly of ether and air, and the qualities that make up ether and air that we were looking at before, gives rise to this body type. And this body type is prone to being underweight, for example. It's prone to anxiety. It's prone to nervous tension. It's prone to dryness in the body. And all of those things are based on the fact that the qualities that make up this constitution or this body type are those gunas, right? They're light, they're dry, they're rough. And so that comes together to form this body type. If we look at the other end of the spectrum, we've got Kapha people, Kapha body types. And so Kapha people tend to be naturally heavy set. So they're often bigger than other people. And it's not necessarily that they eat more than anybody else. It's just that their body type is bigger. So they've got broad shoulders. They easily gain weight because their metabolism is more sluggish than a Vata person's, for example. So if Vata people ate the same amount and diet as a Kapha person would likely put on weight because of the heaviness of earth and water in their constitution, which leads to a slower metabolism than the Vata person, whose ether or space and air qualities fasten the metabolism. So they're the easy ones to spot because they're the opposites of each other. Pitta people are in the middle. So they're responsive to diet and exercise. If they eat badly and they don't exercise, they tend to put on weight. If they do eat well and they exercise, they tend to lose weight. They're naturally kind of sporty types because they've got fire in their constitution, and they're the only ones that do. They tend to be ambitious and pushy. All of these body types have got pros and cons. So if we were to think about Kapha and say, oh, this is, because this one is prone to weight gain, it's not as good as if you're a Pitta or you're a Vata. Absolutely not the case. Kapha people are loyal and loving and calm and stable people. And so the gifts of Kapha are, that they're generous and loving by nature, that they know how to enjoy themselves. They know how to switch off. Vata people find it very hard to switch off, very prone to anxiety. So they tend to be able to maintain their weight easily, which is great in that regard, but they're also prone to being underweight, which doesn't feel good for anybody that is familiar with that if you're starting to recognize yourself in that body type. And Pitta people, very ambitious, very sharp mind. So they're the really good students that dedicate themselves to things. They tend to be all or nothing though. And so the problem for Pitta is that it can burn out. It does everything at 100%, and it burns itself out in the process. And so oftentimes, people that are having kind of, breakdowns can often be Pitta people, or people that are very prone to inflammation in their body are Pitta people. And so anything from a medical perspective that ends in itis, so tonsillitis or bronchitis, anything that's itis based is inflammatory based. And Pitta people are really prone to that. So all of these body types have got pros and cons. They've all got their gifts and they've all got their weaknesses. And by understanding the elements that make up that constitution, which, as we said earlier, are just convenient names given to groups of qualities, we can use that knowledge therapeutically to say, oh, okay, if Kapha people are prone to sluggishness and heaviness and those qualities, then we need to introduce lightness and roughness into their diets and maybe more vigorous activity to get everything going because of that tendency towards heaviness and dullness that we know comes from earth and water. Or for Vata people, We can say we know that all that dryness and lightness and roughness needs to be balanced by lots of, warm, cooked, soft, nourishing foods, a little bit more passive style of exercise, so not so jolting and high impact stuff. These guys need things that are a little bit slower. Pitta people are kind of good in the middle. They're the ones that will push themselves to extremes. And so as a yoga teacher, when you spot these constitutions in your class, you can help these people to understand that they don't need to compete with their neighbor. They can just listen to their own body and maybe, practice moderation in their own yoga practice rather than pushing to extreme the whole time. Kapha people, you need to gear them up. You need to get them to to do the strong sun salutations, to work through namaskar, A and B with a bit of vigor. And Vata people need to just kind of take it down a notch and, move at their own pace so that they're not getting overwhelmed by it. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
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 Great. So there are certain diets that are really helpful for the different constitutions. There are certain types of yoga and exercises that are really helpful for the constitutions. There's so much more that we could say about this, but given that it's just an introduction to these concepts, we might move on. And one of the things I thought we could do, we can either do it together now. So I'm not sure if Alice sent everybody a PDF with a form to print out and fill out.
I put it in the Facebook group. So if you guys open that Facebook page, you'll find a PDF there.
So it might be easier actually if you want. So the PDF you would fill out by hand, and so we can decide together now. You can either go to this address, themedicineman.com.au, and in fact it will just pop up, and you can do the body type test. So we can either do that together now, and I can help you kind of answer any of those questions, or it's something that you could perhaps do after this. And then if you've got any questions that you wanted to clarify with me, you could just reach out and we can talk that through, because I've got quite a bit of extra information that I want to share with you guys. So to go through that together would probably take us maybe 15-20 minutes. So we can either do it now, you guys can make the call, or you can do that in your own time and then just reach out to me with any questions if anything was, if you weren't sure about it.
Yeah. If it's to get like what percentage we are, we kind of did the
Yeah.
I forget what it was, the Deepak Chopra one on his
Yeah.
website. And
Yeah.
I did mine twice because I was like, is everything subjective, like depending on like what kind of mood you're in?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I got everything. Like I was fairly equal. But yeah, like the questions on his website were very like subjective. But
Yeah.
I'll be interested to do the one that's on your website.
Yeah, and look, so this is the thing with the online body type test. So we call it Prakriti in Ayurveda, which is your constitution. So that's the ratio of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, which, as we just discovered, is actually the elemental mix that makes you up, which is actually the combination of qualities, right, that is predominant in you. When you fill those forms out online, the problem is that they don't tell you that you need to fill those out based on your tendency over the course of your whole life, right? Mm. So Prakriti, constitution, never changes. So when you're filling it out, you've got to think to yourself, okay, when I was in high school, was I bigger than everybody else or smaller than everybody else? Was my hair generally, has it always been really thick and kind of lustrous and curly, or has it always been kind of, really dry and brittle and a bit thin? Have I always been a bit prone to pimples or not? It's not based on where you are now, right? And that's the difference. So Prakriti, constitution, never changes, which is why you've got to think when you answer those questions over the course of my whole life, what is my tendency, right? Vikriti is your current state of the doshas. That changes all the time, right? So you might say, over the course of my whole life, I've never really been prone to constipation. But in the last 6 months, I've been constipated, right? When you fill out that form the first time to find out your Prakriti, you need to say no to constipation. If you want to find out your current state of health, then you say yes. And so then you can compare Prakriti to Vikriti and understand which dosha is out of balance, Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, and therefore take remedial measures based on like increasing like or opposites balancing, in order to introduce the things into your world that you need to bring balance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like, super helpful, I think.
Yeah, with the PDF that Alice put in the Facebook page, print it out and you'll see there's 2 columns on that. One says whole life and one says currently. So fill it out for based on your tendencies over the course of your whole life and then based on now. So you might say, you know what, it was never a problem for me to, gain or lose weight, which is a pitta trait. But actually for the past 6 months, I've been really struggling to lose weight, which is kapha, right? So then that will show you that your kapha is out of balance as far as that's concerned, right? Or if you're currently underweight and struggling to put on weight, you'll realize that it's your vata that's out of balance. And so you can work out what to do about it once you understand which dosha is out of balance, right? So you need to understand your constitution, your basic makeup, which is technically a mix of all 3, but will likely be what we call dual doshic. So you'll probably have 2 that are fairly close to each other. And when you're dual doshic, it means you can yo-yo between those 2, right? Sometimes you're this one and then sometimes you're that one, based on those signs of imbalance, which is on one of the forms that you'll get from, as an output from the Medicine Man body type test, and I can send it to you. It'll show you the signs of imbalance according to Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, and then you can follow those remedial kind of recommendations that are on the sheet until those symptoms disappear, and then you're back into your balanced state. Is that making sense, everyone, or have I lost you?
Yeah, that makes sense. So looking at the current state and previous state.
Yeah. So you look at your tendency for your whole life, that's your constitution. And your constitution might be 2 things, dual doshic, in which case you can be sometimes more this and sometimes more that, depending on what's going on in the world. The second column is your current state of health, Vikriti. And so that will tell you which dosha is out of balance now. And in the forms that you get from the Medicine Man, website and things, and I can send them to you, you can have one for each, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. It says signs of imbalance and then what to do about it. And so then you can just be looking at that going, okay, I'm feeling ungrounded, scattered, anxious, overwhelmed by life. My Vata's out. I'm feeling, short-tempered, irritable, snappy with people, really hot. My Pitta's out. Or I'm feeling sluggish, overwhelmed, bit depressed, feeling lethargic, unmotivated, my Kapha's out. And so it will show you what to do about it in terms of certain herbs you can take, certain foods to favor and avoid, because, the foods that it will tell you to favor and avoid will have the qualities that you need, which are the ones it'll tell you to favor, or the qualities that are too high already, which it'll tell you to avoid. Right. And that's where it starts to move into the Ayurvedic nutrition side of things, which we'll talk about now if everyone's happy to move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when it comes to Ayurveda and nutrition, you're never on a diet, right? And that's one of the best things about knowing your constitution is that you never need to diet again. So dieting can be helpful. I'm not saying there's not a role for that, but it's usually a harsh process of denial, and it's not actually necessary for you to lose or maintain weight. You just need to eat according to your constitution, and that will help you maintain your weight and health naturally. And that's the basis of Ayurvedic nutrition. So nutrition is what we eat, right? Digestion is how we eat. And in Ayurveda, there's a really big difference between those 2 things. Whenever we think about nutrition in the West, we think about what we're putting into our mouths, right? What food we're having. But actually, these 2 things go hand in hand. And of the 2, digestion is more important than nutrition. So how you eat is actually more important than what you eat. We are going to focus on here today. But the reason that digestion is more important than nutrition is because you can eat the healthiest food in the world, can be the perfect stuff. But if you don't digest it properly, it becomes toxic in your body anyway, right? So digestion is at the root of good health in Ayurveda. And basically, I think we say something to the effect of 80% of disease states have their origin in digestion, right? There's a faultiness to do with digestion, which is impacting the body, causing toxins, moving in different systems that are creating outcomes. And over a period of time, imbalance becomes illness. So digestion is how we eat, and there are rules or guidelines for how to eat. I'll share kind of some of that stuff with you a little bit today, but it's things like trying to eat at the same time each day as you can, as close to the same time each day, because your body comes to expect food at those times. And if your body's expecting food, it's secreting digestive enzymes ahead of time, which means that when the food comes, your stomach's prepared, right? If you randomly just eat meals, all over the shop, all of a sudden you flood your body, your stomach with food, and your body's got to marshal itself to deal with that, right? And our bodies are amazing, right? They can deal with it most of the time. But if you're a little bit compromised, if your gut's a little bit out, if your microbiome's not quite right, then those things can start to become problematic. That starts to build a bit of toxin in the system, and that builds up over time. Making sure that we don't overeat is important for digestion. We should try to eat till about 80% full, we say in Ayurveda. And I'll give you the little life hack that shows you how to realize when you're 80% full, because otherwise, how do you know? What does 80% full feel like? Like, nobody knows, but there is a sign from your body that tells you. So nutrition and digestion, two really important things, work hand in glove. Digestion is really important, but obviously so are the things that we put into our mouths. This is a big subject in Ayurveda, and so this is just an introduction. So feel free just to kind of sit back and see how these concepts, how you feel about what you hear tonight, but it could just change your relationship with food forever. And for so many people, that's such a liberating thing, because, I think, particularly if you've got kapha in the constitution, or you kind of struggled to, maintain weight over the course of your life, it can be a really emotional subject as well. So I guess, before we dive into it all, the key question that I like to, talk to my clients about and my students about is, what drives your eating behavior? And we're all really different about the answer to that. So for some people, they eat according to taste, right? They just eat the things that they like to eat. And that's how they choose the food that they have, in their diet and in their lives. For other people, they're always on a diet. So everything they're eating is always geared towards trying to lose weight. On the flip side, you've got, guys and girls out there that are wanting to bulk up the whole time. So everything is about trying to bulk and, gain kind of weight that they can, build into the kind of body that they want. For most of us, habit is a big part of it, right? We tend to eat the same things all the time, right? You've got so many things that you will reach, for when it comes to breakfast. You've got a few things that are on rotation for dinner. There's a few places that you tend to order from Uber Eats, on rotation. So, habit is a big part of how we eat. And a lot of those habits are actually formed when we're young, so the way that we've grown up kind of eating as well really impacts the choices that we're making now. For a lot of people that are super busy, it's just about convenience. Like, what's quick and easy? Like, what's near my work? Or, what can I kind of quickly throw together, for the kids? Or, everybody's got their own version of what's driving their eating behavior. But just becoming aware of that is actually a really important step, is to understand what is driving my choices around the foods that I eat, because that helps you understand yourself and your relationship to food a little bit more. And as we start to talk through some of these different ways of thinking about food, you can still eat according to, what's convenient for you. But maybe some of the choices that you're making will start to change based on, the Ayurvedic understanding of food. So most of us in the West, when we think about healthy eating, if we're thinking about that, some form of this kind of pyramid is likely to inform your thinking. How much sugar am I eating? How much fat's in my diet? Am I avoiding carbs? Am I eating too much red meat? It's based on kind of this food pyramid model. This model was actually developed in sort of the 80s, or became popularized in the 80s as a way to introduce people at that time to the concept of adequate nutrition in a way that was accessible. So prior to that, people weren't necessarily thinking in terms of, carbs, fats and proteins per se. Some people were, if they were really focused around diet and health. But a lot of people really weren't, like the 80s is when, microwave dinners and stuff came in, so people were just kind of eating according to recipes that they learned from their parents, or things that were convenient, or what they could get in the supermarket. And so they introduced this concept of the healthy food pyramid to start to broaden people's dietary choices to provide adequate nutrition. And this food pyramid was a way for that to be accessible for people. And I think that this food pyramid was actually developed in Sweden originally in the 1970s. And I mean, that's a long time ago, right? The 1970s, and that's still really informing the thinking, particularly in Western countries today, in terms of how we eat. And in fact, a lot of the kind of modern diets, more modern diets, that a lot of us will have cycled between over the course of our lives, depending on how long you've been around, still has elements of this carbs, fats, proteins model to varying degrees, based on, which diet you're following. So, for example, if we look at the paleo diet, this is all about following those ancestral eating patterns. So the way that our primitive ancestors ate in the past, and that's got a really heavy emphasis on, protein or meat, and looks to eliminate, as many grains and beans, the legumes and things out of the diet, as possible. Or for people that are on the keto diet, which is all about kind of high fat but ultra low carb diet, or vegan, which is, obviously solely plant-based foods, so cutting out anything that's derived from animal products, or the FODMAP diet, which eliminates, high FODMAP foods, which are short-chain carbs that are poorly absorbed by the small intestine. And that can be really, beneficial for people with IBS or SIBO. So it's not to say that these diets are bad or they're wrong. I mean, sometimes for some people, these things can be helpful. But how do you know? How do you know which one's the right one? In Ayurveda, it depends who's asking the question, right? So kind of coming back to our kind of constitution discussion, there's no one diet fits all. If the diet of the moment happens to suit your constitution, then you tend to get results with it. But oftentimes you're doing all the right things, eating the way that you're told you're supposed to, but it's not working, right? You either feel worse or gain weight or lose weight, or if you're trying to put on weight. Like it's hit and miss, right? It's hit and miss depending on whether the diet of the moment suits your constitution or not. But we've got a really different way of thinking about food in Ayurveda that kind of sets you free from those paradigms, which are often really strict and a little bit harsh and based on denial. If you've got some really chronic kind of issues, I'm not saying that there's not value in FODMAP diets and things like that. There can be. If you've got, SIBO and that kind of stuff. So there is a role for those things, as and when needed, but they're not really often very helpful for having a healthy relationship with food over a long period of time. And certainly if you haven't arrived at a point where you need to be on one of these really kind of strict elimination-based diets, then there are other ways to be thinking about food that can keep you more balanced and avoid ending up with the need to be on something so extreme. So, of course, it's based on the 20 qualities, right? So we replace this kind of, model that says you have to have this much of all these different foods in your diet to an understanding of, well, what are the qualities of the different aspects of the food that you're eating? And so we talked a little bit about it before, but here's those examples once again. So avocado has the qualities of heavy, dense, oily, it's cooling, and it's nourishing, right? So avocado is healthy. We all know that, right? It's got healthy fats and that kind of stuff. But if you're a kapha person that's prone to sluggishness and weight gain, avocado, while healthy and while it has good fats, isn't necessarily a great choice because it's heavy and dense, right? And those are qualities that aren't helpful if you're already a bit heavy and dense inside. Popcorn, qualities of lightness, airiness, dryness, roughness, very good for a kapha person, right? That needs to lighten everything up, that needs to, become less dense and oily and heavy. So that kapha person avoids avocados and snacks on popcorn instead. But if you're a vata person who's naturally kind of underweight and dry and, skinny and, anxious by nature, this is going to make it worse if this is what you're snacking on. So that vata person would do better if they were having avocados as their snack, or things that have these sorts of qualities. So the qualities are there to balance us out. Chilies are a good example. It's got the qualities of, spiciness, heating, it does have lightness in it as well. So we can use food therapeutically in that way to introduce the qualities that we need. So that's one of the ways we think about food in Ayurveda. The other way we think about it, so in addition to that, and this is why I said nutrition in Ayurveda is a really big concept. So don't feel overwhelmed by it. Don't feel like you need to be sitting there taking notes now. All I'm trying to do at this point is just to introduce you to other thought processes that factor into what constitutes, a balanced or healthy diet if you're placing an Ayurvedic lens over that. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming at all. And it's the first time you've heard it and it's completely foreign. So give yourself permission just to kind of, sit with it. So there's the qualities of the food. That's one thing. The other thing is the tastes. So according to Ayurveda and science, your tongue is capable of picking up 6 different tastes and the different parts of your tongue register each of those different tastes or flavors, and they send that signal to your body to secrete the right digestive enzymes that will allow you to digest that taste. Those 6 tastes are sour, pungent. Pungent is heating, so all the spicy stuff, chilies. Astringent. Astringent's an interesting one because it has, which is a terrible word, but it has a puckering effect, like in the mouth and in the body. So it's things that kind of dry you out a little bit. If you've ever drunk pomegranate juice, for example, you realize, or cranberry juice is quite astringent as well. It leaves the tongue kind of with a sensation of dryness, even though it's wet. Bitter is another flavor that you're capable of recognizing. Bitter is one that tends to be lacking in our Western diet quite a lot. In the Eastern countries and in Europe, they use bitter a lot more. Bitter is very cooling in the body, so it kind of it drops the temperature quickly. Salty is one we're all familiar with, and sweet is the other one. So sweet, sour, pungent, astringent, bitter, and salty are the 6 tastes that the different foods are capable of having, and that your tongue is capable of picking up. And each of those tastes has a different effect on the body. So sour things, which is lemon, often we think of lemon as bitter, right? People will say it's bitter, but it's actually sour taste. So sour is cleansing for the body. It cleanses your tissues. It can also help you to increase absorption of minerals in the foods that you eat. So you get the sour flavor through sour fruits, through yogurts, through fermented foods, sour taste. Salty, as we know, improves the taste. You add salt to things to bring the flavor of things out more, partly because it lubricates. Salty attracts moisture. And so if your tongue is lacking moisture, if there's no saliva, you actually can't taste anything. But it also lubricates your tissues because it draws moisture to it. It stimulates your digestion. And so you can get salt through, adding it, and obviously the better quality salt you can. So, Himalayan pink salt is a good option, or some of the sea salts, seaweed products, things like that have the salty flavor. Astringent. Astringent is almost the opposite of salty in many ways because it absorbs water. It tightens tissues. It dries out fats in the body. And so you get this astringent taste through legumes or beans, raw fruits and vegetables, certain herbs, things like pomegranate that we talked about before. So astringing is very good where there is flaccidity in the body. So if you have hemorrhoids, for example, or you have areas where things have become very sluggish in the body, you need to tighten those things up. Adding more astringency through adding more legumes and raw fruits and veg to your diet can tighten things inside your body. Pungency is good for stimulating your digestion and metabolism, so really good for kapha types. Adding a bit of these kind of spicy herbs to their cooking and things gets everything going. But if you're a pitta person, naturally got a lot of fire in your diet, this is where you need to be very moderate in your body. Sorry. If you're a pitta person with naturally a lot of fire in your body, then with your diet, you need to be careful of not having too much heat. But the irony is, pitta people want to go for the hottest chilies that they can. They add chili to everything because they're all about extremes, right? So the key thing for pitta is to be moderate in the things that they do. And that includes this pungent taste. So for kapha people, it's really good. For vata people, just in moderation, because you don't want it to dry you out too much, because things that are very hot are often very drying as well. So moderation for everybody outside of the kaphas. Bitter is the other flavor. This is very good for detoxifying. And so lots of dark leafy greens have that bitter flavor, and there are herbs and spices that you can use in your cooking to add more bitterness. But it's very good, for detoxifying and for lightening the body. So if you're interested in some weight loss and that sort of thing. Sweetness is the last one. This is good for building the body. So this has an anabolic action in the body. Anabolic meaning building tissue. So it builds tissues, it calms nerves. Like how often do we comfort eat, right? Often we'll reach for sweet things because it calms us down. You need sweet in your diet. So never be guilted into thinking that you have to never have any sweetness in your diet. I've actually known people that have cut sweetness entirely out of their diet, including honey, like absolutely no sweet at all. And they were actually very, very bitter. Funnily enough, like they were lacking that sweetness and that joy for life because they weren't adding it in. And through that process of increasing if you've just completely cut something out of your life, there is no like to increase like anymore. And so they ended up lacking that. So you need sweetness in your diet, but it does increase tissue. And so we do have to be mindful of how much we have, particularly if we're a constitution that's prone, to weight gain easily. So they're the 6 tastes that we also think about from an Ayurvedic perspective. We look at the qualities of the food that you're having and try to balance that out. We look at the 6 tastes and try to kind of get, a good combination of those 6 tastes according to, what we might be, needing in at that point in our lives. This is an amazing concept. This is a gift from the East to the West. The concept of heating and cooling. Completely missing in the Western understanding of nutrition, by and large. But some foods heat you up and some foods cool you down. And on some level, we tend to know that intuitively. We intuitively crave things on hot days that help to cool us down. We'll go and eat ice cream or an ice block or maybe cucumbers and that kind of stuff. Go for coconut waters to kind of hydrate and cool ourselves down. Or warming things on cold days, we'll go and have, kind of spicy pho soups and things like that. So on an intuitive level, we know it, but it's so much better if you actually understand which things heat you up and which things cool you down. So if you're prone to inflammation, it can help you to avoid certain foods that are going to make it worse, like coffee, for example. Coffee is not bad, but it's heating and it's drying and it's very stimulating. So that suits some people and it doesn't suit other people. And so if you're someone that it doesn't suit, then you just do it in moderation. And this is the thing with Ayurveda. Moderation, it's rarely, must and never. It's more about favor and avoid, So if on the course, of your week, you're mostly eating the things that are in keeping with, your constitution, that you're mostly, making those choices that keep you in balance, then for the most part, your body's fine. But heating and cooling is a really interesting concept that we can use ourselves. And so I was very keen when I heard this about, well, how do we know what's heating and cooling? Like, how do we work that out? This is how we work it out. So foods get their thermal qualities or their ability to heat or cool things down from the elements that make them up, right? So if we look at sweet flavor, for example, the sweet flavor is actually made up, because remember those 20 qualities and the accompanying elements describe everything in the universe, right? So the sweet flavor is actually made up of earth and water and those accompanying qualities. Salty is made up of water and fire. Sour is made up of earth and fire. Pungent, fire and air. Bitter, air and space. And the astringent flavor is made up of air and earth. So anything that has fire in it, which is these 3, is heating. Everything else is cooling. So there's three flavors that will heat you up: salty, sour, and pungent. And there are 3 flavors that will cool you down: sweet, bitter, and astringent. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's a lot and you're not expected to be able to apply this stuff straight away, believe me. I've got a hack for you coming up that just will help you choose food kind of day to day. But this is just so that you can get an understanding that food is the first medicine in Ayurveda. And so actually by understanding nutrition from that Ayurvedic perspective, and even if it's only at a really kind of basic level, it helps you to get out of the, the yo-yo diets and the merry-go-round of, what's in fad, now. But it also helps you to start to make choices a little bit more consciously with the things that you do eat, in terms of understanding, what is my basic ratio of these things? Do I usually crave salty or sweet? And if I'm mostly craving salty things, then I'm increasing the amount of heat in my body, right? And if I've got inflammation or rashes on my skin or heat-based issues, then maybe that's not that helpful. And I need to find something else that I can snack on instead of salty things. Or on the flip side, if I eat, a lot of sweet things, and I know that sweet things are anabolic for the body, so they kind of build tissue in the body. Is that something that I want, or is it something that I don't want? So you can start to choose those things a little bit more carefully, based on that understanding. And of course, the final thing which underpins all of this is that it all comes down to the individual. So what's right for Vata constitution, the diet choice is completely different to what's right for Pitta and what's right for Kapha, right? So there's no one size that fits everybody. But there are themes that if you're this body type or this body type or this body type, or if you're a combination of these 2 or these 2, there are certain things to favor and avoid according to the things that we've just talked about as far as they're suitable for balancing out each of these different constitutions. So the first and foremost thing is that you need to understand your constitution, because that will give you the map that you need to understand which qualities you need to bring into your life and which ones you need to kind of minimize in your life. And then you can use foods that have those qualities and avoid foods that, that have the qualities that aren't going to be helpful. Does that make sense for everybody?
It's very interesting. Wow. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like figuring like out things that I'm already doing, kind of thing.
Amazing. That's amazing. And that's the first step, right? This is not about being perfect, right? Take all the pressure off yourself to be perfect around this. This is just introducing you to stuff that they discovered 5,000 years ago that still applies to our lives now, that you will find is really practical and makes a difference. You know, when you start to add up, little by little, things add up, which is why nothing's, bad in and of itself, right? But because we tend to eat habitually, because we do things habitually, it adds up over time, right? So I think about my clients, for example, and coffee. And I know coffee is always getting picked on in, various health circles. Coffee's not good or bad, like I said before, but it's heating, drying, and stimulating. That's good for some people. It's not good for other people. But when I think about coffee being one of those habitual things that we, so many of us do, if you have one coffee a day, it's like that's by no means excessive, right? One coffee a day is not an excessive behavior, but that's 30 a month, right? And if that one coffee a day is a double shot, right? If you're going for a large or whatever, that's 60 a month. And that's how it adds up. Coffee's not bad in and of itself, but the qualities of heating and drying and stimulating, when you're doing that 60 times in a month, for example, or even 30 times in a month, is going to have an impact on your health. Same as if you just keep having salad every day for lunch. 30 salads over the course of a year, or 30 salads over the course of a month, is going to add up, let alone over the course of a year, what that's going to do. If you're having that same salad through winter, regardless of the fact that it's cold and, shit outside, then you're not even taking into account, that increasing kind of principle and adjusting, to accommodate the season that we're in. So you can look at the way that we eat and you can step outside of those habits, or at least be participating in those in a conscious way. And anything you do every day adds up. So, if you have one coffee a day, it's 30 a month, it's going to add up. For a kapha person, that's actually probably a good thing because it's stimulating, getting the metabolism going. For a pitta person, it might be too much heat. For a vata person, it's going to string you out. It's probably going to make you too anxious. And so you've got to be aware that those things are adding up over time. And I said to a friend of mine recently, I was like, well, if you went to the gym 30 times in a month, would you expect to see a difference? They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, it's the same with everything, right? Anything you do, that's going to add up. And so, it just allows us to participate in a more conscious way with the things that we're doing in order to bring the balance that we're looking for. But here's the life hack, right? So Ayurvedic nutrition can be straightforward. I mean, the principles that we've just talked about, they're fairly straightforward, but in practice, that's quite a lot to try and get your head around, right? So here's the one that's the easy way to get your head around it, right? So you can apply this, when you're making your own kind of food at home, or if you're going into a restaurant to order off a menu, right? Here's how you can think about it. So the first thing you think about, do I want something hot or cold? Right? And by hot and cold, it does apply to the thermal qualities of the food, but in a really basic sense, it applies to, are you having, a salad for lunch, or are you having, a pasta, right? And I know one's light and one's heavy, which is probably the first thing we think about, but pasta is also cooked and warm, whereas salad tends to be cold and, not cooked. And so you can think about, do I need something hot or something cold today? And mostly that's going to be based on what's the weather like around you. So you can use the principle of opposites balancing each other. And also, how do I feel inside? Am I feeling kind of hot and a bit stressed out and whatever, then go for something cold. If I'm feeling a bit kind of, cold and a bit kind of down and whatever, then go for something hot, or if you're not feeling very grounded, go for something kind of hot. So that's the first thing. Think about the temperature of what you're about to eat. Is it hot or is it cold? The second is moist versus dry, right? So how wet is the meal you're about to have? If you're going to have like a soup or a stew, that's more moist than, again, if you're having a salad, right, which tends to be dry, right? So think about temperature, moisture, and then weight, right? How heavy or light is this meal I'm about to have? Steak is heavier than salad. for example. Pasta, heavier than salad. So when you look at that combination of hot, cold, you know, moist or dry, light or heavy, that will allow you pretty much to cover off all the key things that you need to think about in terms of using food as medicine. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. This is actually a great way to think of it.
Yeah, it's the easy way to think about it. So you can order off a menu based on these things according to how you feel in any given day, or according to how you want to feel, right? Because like will increase like. Whatever you choose to eat is going to impact the way you feel. So you can either do it to balance out something that doesn't feel good, or to introduce the way that you want to feel. Temperature, moisture, and weight. So definitely we could dive into this a lot more, of course. But if you keep it fairly top line, that's how it'll stay really practical for you. Does anyone have any questions about any of that?
So how can we, I think it was great examples, but like on our daily life, if we want to implement this, how can we know, like for each of the food type, how can we describe, like find out these qualities so then use the foods properly?
Yes. I think, I mean, so definitely look, there are lists of foods that you can access that will tell you the properties, right? But then you're going to spend your life going through lists, or lists, certainly for, you know, initially anyway. But what I would encourage you to do is actually look at it, right? Those 10 pairs of opposites that we talked about before are really basic things, right? Hot, cold, heavy, light, dry, oily, you know, rough, smooth. Like, just look at those things, right? Yeah. Look at the food that you're preparing and making. When you cut up a cucumber, lots of juice comes out, right? It's a moist vegetable.
Yeah.
Right? When you cut up a tomato, lots of juice comes out. It's moist. You know, if you're slicing up a sweet potato, there's not a lot of moisture that's coming out of that, right? So if you actually just pay attention, you'll be able to see it. You know, if you're cooking eggplant, people put salt on it to draw the moisture out of it, right? Because it's a moist vegetable. So you'll actually, when you start paying attention, you'll be able to see what things are. You know, toast is dry. You know, you toast bread and it becomes dry. We add butter on it to add more moistness to it, you know, in order to do that. And then you can think, well, what am I going to put on top of that? Maybe I'm going to put tomato because it's adding more moistness to it if I'm trying to get away from the dryness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But
you might add a bit of mayo, you know, mayonnaise to add a bit of moistness to things.
How about the tomato paste? Like, because tomato is moist, tomato paste is a bit like spicy.
Yeah. So that's different, right? And you can tell by looking at it, it's different. So when we cook something, we change the qualities of it. And so you need to be aware of that. Anything that's been kind of processed, like tomato paste, that's definitely changed, you know, the qualities of it. So you just got to look at that stuff. If you're putting it into, you know, if you're adding a bit of that for flavor in a sauce, the sauce is still going to be moist, right? Unless you know, reduce it to the point that you know, dry something out. So there's also the way you cook your things, right? You can allow more moistness in your food, or you can dry it out more. Like an overcooked steak, a well done steak is less moist than a you know, a rare steak.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to see it because it's there. Those principles are so universal. You apply them all the time in your day-to-day life anyway. You know, how do you know when your washing's dry? You know, you can feel it. You look how much moisture is left in it, you know, all those things. But it's just applying that to food in order to go, okay, what's the temperature? What's the level of moisture? And what's the weight? How light or heavy is this? And what do I need to feel in order to feel like I'm going to be more balanced in this moment?
Yeah, very interesting. Actually, I find it really interesting because I'm an engineer as well. So I like how we work together, like all you, like food and the body types and how they work together. It's very fascinating, actually.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing.
And I have another question.
Sure.
And you go through what we eat, how we eat, digestion. So you said we should be feeling full 80% of the stomach, and there is a way to understand that.
Yes. Do you want to know?
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on.
Yeah, because I'm never full. How do I find out?
Yeah, I'll tell you how to find out. And actually, I only just found out myself this. So this, when I heard it, I was like, that doesn't apply to me. Like that's not true. And now that I'm paying attention, it is true. It happens every time. Anyway, so I'll teach it to you. So these are just some Ayurvedic tips for living in balance, right? So we've talked about, where Ayurveda comes from, how that's still relevant and why that's still relevant to our lives today. We've talked a little bit about, how that knowledge is applied to food and how that impacts our health and our individual constitutions, being the kind of the foundation of all those choices. These are just some Ayurvedic tips that you can apply for living in balance, to bring more balance into your world. So one of them, only eat foods that are in season, right? This is really interesting because at one time, everybody knew what was in season because that's all that was available. In our modern lives, I didn't know what was in season and what wasn't because I can basically get anything I want anytime I want from the supermarket, right? Like if you come from certain cultural backgrounds, have got that knowledge still closer, and if you're paying attention, it's like, oh yeah, there's always cherries in summer, close to Christmas we have cherries, and so you might have some degree of awareness of it, but apples tend to be around all year, and you can kind of get oranges around all year. But the foods that are in season have the qualities and the medicinal properties that we need to balance us out in that season. And so if you can eat foods that are ideally available locally, so grown locally, and are in season, and that's according to nature, not Woolworths, you'll find that that has a huge impact because ultimately, we are nature. We're extensions of that. And so we should be connected to that in the food choices that we're making so that we're allowing nature to help us to stay balanced, because nature's providing what we need to stay balanced during those periods across the year. So rather than just eating the same the whole year, which so many of us do, right? We just always have our chicken sandwich, or we always just have our whatever, is to mix it up by understanding what's in nature, what's in season rather. And so, you can Google that stuff. There are lists of foods. Make sure you do an Australian list, because otherwise you might find yourself, finding stuff from America or whatever. If you can get stuff that's local, farmers markets are great for that because, they're grown locally and they're, based on what's in season. But I really encourage you to look at it, because that knowledge seems to be getting almost entirely lost amongst so many of us because we just don't know, because we just always got access. So foods that are in season is a big one. Skew towards a plant-based diet. I'm not saying veganism is a choice and everybody needs to make that for themselves. But I would definitely encourage people to think about how much meat they're adding into their own diet, because meat is it's quite heavy, right? In terms of those properties we were looking at before, the qualities, it's definitely very heavy and it's heating. And so for most of us, we tend to feel a bit better if we're on a lighter meat diet. Having said that, people that have got strong pitta constitutions need to have enough protein in their diet to feel satisfied, to feel full. So you've got to work that out for yourself in terms of, what's the right balance. But ultimately, having more plant-based meals in your diet across the week is definitely helpful in terms of your body's ability to digest, metabolize, cleanse, to do its thing. And actually, again, when you think back kind of historically, people weren't having meat every single day of their lives for the most part because they had to hunt it and get it, right? And so in, kind of recent history, we've gone into, mass-produced farming and that kind of stuff. So we just have to go to Woolies. We can order and eat as much meat as we like. But that's a really recent thing in human evolution, that we have that kind of luxury, if you like. And so what's helpful for your body is to have, more of a plant-based diet. But that's not to say you need to exclude meat from your diet. So just to be clear, I'm definitely not saying that. Make that choice for yourself, but give your body a bit of a break where you can, because meat is hard to digest. This one I love: reduce and replace rather than deny, right? So Ayurveda says you don't have to give up the things that you love, right? But you need to be aware that everything you're doing is adding up. And like I said, 1 coffee a day, not a lot. 30 coffees a month starts to add up. But if you're having 2 a day, you're having double shots, that's 60 a month, starts to add up. Same as if you're having 2 glasses of wine with dinner at night. 60 glasses of wine a month is maybe more than you imagined that you were having when you were feeling quite moderate, just by having 2 glasses of wine with dinner. So it's just understanding that these things add up over time. And so if you can start to reduce things, to be aware that over the course of a month, how many is that actually? and then replace it. So don't deny yourself things, reduce the amount that you're having if it's got qualities that aren't helpful for you, and then replace it with something else that you like, rather than, you know, denying yourself. So, for example, roasted dandelion tea is a really amazing alternative to coffee for people that are suffering from inflammation or that have got too much heat in their body, skin rashes or stressed and, you know, anxious or angry. That kind of stuff is signs of heat in the body. If you opt for roasted dandelion tea, it's still got that smoky kind of roasty flavor that coffee has. It's not exactly the same, but it's kind of can hit that spot. And as a coffee lover myself, I can vouch for that. But it actively supports the liver, right? Which is where heat tends to build inside the body. And so for people that are just kind of switching out from coffee into, you know, roasted dandelion every other day, they can reduce their intake by half by doing that, and still be having coffee in their life, you know, several times a week, you know, still enjoying their morning coffee routine if that's what they like. So you can have those things in your world, I guess, is what I'm saying, without necessarily having to go overboard with things. And that kind of leads into this other point here: moderation in all things. 80-20 is what I counsel my clients and students around. You know, we're not all going to live like saints and yogis, you know, over the course of our lives, and we have access, you know, in our modern affluent Western society that we're living into, amazing, you know, cuisines and you know, foods and desserts and that kind of stuff, and I think we should allow ourselves to enjoy those things, but you keep it moderate. You know, if you apply the 80-20 rule, if 80% of the time you pretty much do what's, you know, what's healthy and what's good for you and what suits your constitution, your body can deal with 20% of the time if you have a blowout at the weekend with friends and that kind of stuff, you know. So give yourself permission, you know, to try to maintain your balance 80% of the time. If you can do it, that's amazing. And then your body can easily deal with that other 20% if you know, if you want to let your hair down from time to time. Eat according to your constitution. We've talked about that. That's the key, right? If you understand what your constitution is, that means it will give you the foods to favor and avoid. You can look that up on Google. You can get the you'll get the printouts if you do the dosha quiz on my website. It'll give you foods to favor and avoid. So you just go through that list, all the things it says to favor. You just highlight the ones that you like, and you start adding more of those to your shopping every week, or you start eating more of those. They're things that you like. They're things that it tells you are good for you, so you just go for those. Things that it says to avoid that you realize are actually featuring highly in your you know, kind of daily or weekly repertoire, then you start to cut them back. Doesn't mean you have to cut them out altogether, but you cut them back, and so they become more of a treat than a staple in your diet. And that way you'll naturally tend to manage your own weight quite easily. Adding khichdi to your weekly repertoire. I don't know if you guys know khichdi, if you come across it in your yoga journey, but khichdi is a mung dal and rice combination dish, which looks like the stuff that you're seeing on the screen. But it mimics the benefits of fasting without actually going without food, right? Which is pretty amazing. So fasting, we know, is generally good for people every now and again, particularly if you're a kapha. Intermittent fasting is good. If you're a vata, better not to intermittent fast. Pitta, depending on if you're kind of, you know, if you've gained weight, then you'll benefit from intermittent fasting as well. But fasting essentially is designed to give your body a break, right? You stop the burden of having to transform food and, you know, turn that into energy and turn that into waste and do all the stuff that our incredible bodies do. You can add khichdi to your repertoire. It's pretty quick and easy to cook. You just kind of boil it all up and, you know, add some ginger and some, you know, spices and that kind of stuff, and it tastes pretty good. Lots of fresh lemon juice on top. If you like coriander, that's like amazing as well. You can add whatever, you know, vegetables are good for your constitution or are in season at that time. You can add that in for flavor and variation. But if you add that to your repertoire, it's effectively cleansing every week. And so you can either just, you know, cook that for the family. Most kids like it too. So like if you're cooking for other people, like most people will, you know, relatively happy to eat it. If they're older and they're interested in their health and they understand why they're eating it, then they'll definitely go along with it. But yeah, so you can do that for breakfast, lunch and dinner if you want to effectively fast for a full day, or you can just add it here and there, batch cook it up and then keep it in the fridge and just have it for breakfast, lunch or dinner here and there in between your other meals. But anytime you do it, it's going to be good because it gives your system that break. And here's the answer to your question. When your stomach gets to 80% full, you'll hiccup. We say burp, but it's more of a hiccup. And this is why I didn't recognize it when the person that told me about this said it. I'm like, I don't burp like when I eat. But what I realized is that actually, I don't know, can you guys see me still? Because I can only see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so when you're eating, like when you get to 80% full, you'll find that you like it's like an intake. It's a very mild burp or hiccup. Like your body will react in that way, and if you're paying attention, you'll notice it. When that happens, you've hit 80% full, so that's when you should stop eating. When you're trying to just guess what 80% feels like, it's impossible, right? Most people, and in Japan, one of the things they do is eat to 80% capacity, and purely based on that alone, they've got the highest number of people that are over 100 years old. And they say that that's the reason for it, is because everybody else, and particularly in the West, overeats. We eat too much. We put our bodies under pressure. Our stomach can't digest the amount of food that we've got in there, and so even if it was healthy going in, it starts to become toxic inside our bodies, and so we're damaging ourselves in the process simply by overeating. That burp or that hiccup will start to be your sign that you've had enough. And start to notice the people that you're eating dinner with. You don't have to point it out to them necessarily, unless you think there's someone that would be interested. But if you find it hard to see it in yourself, start watching it in other people. When they hiccup part way through the meal, they've hit 80% full, and technically that's when they should stop eating. Last one, tongue scraping. Has everyone got a tongue scraper?
No, I feel like I have to get one. I think about it every morning and compare myself to all of the yoga teachers on their morning routine.
Yeah, you have to. This is the easiest detox in the world, right? Is to scrape your tongue every morning. At night when you go to bed, right? Your body, everything slows down. Your body moves into its kind of, rest and digest, but also cleanse mode, right? When you wake up in the morning, rubbish toxins from your gut that your body's produced are deposited on the tongue, right? If you get up, go and have a drink of water or have breakfast, those toxins that were on the tongue straight back into your gut, right? But if you wake up in the morning, we say, technically within a few minutes of waking up, you should go straight to the bathroom, spit whatever saliva is in your mouth out. So don't swallow it when you wake up, spit your saliva out. Then brush your teeth to remove all the toxins and crap from the gum lines. Then scrape your tongue. So it's like it looks like a U-shaped device. You hold the ends of it and you scrape your tongue from back to front, 4 or 5 times, just gently, to remove the mucus coating that's on top. And it's that mucus coating that is the toxins from your body, but it's also what gives you morning breath, right? It's the toxins on your tongue. It's that mucus lining that is morning breath. So if you get up and scrape it off, you'll realize, quickly brush your teeth and scrape your tongue, you'll realize that your breath doesn't smell anymore at all. But if you just get up and brush your teeth, your breath still stinks. It's because the toxins are on the tongue. You've got to get them off. It's the easiest way to detox every morning, just by removing that before you eat something or drink something. So I definitely encourage you to do it. If you can get a copper tongue scraper, that's a really good option. Don't go for plastic because it'll harbor germs. Copper doesn't retain bacteria, which is why it's often recommended. You can get stainless steel ones, and you can get silver ones as well. In my experience, copper's the ones that we sell, because I find that that's, $20, last for life. Get onto it. Any questions?
Can you have dandelion tea with sugar and milk?
Yeah, if that's how you have your coffee, and if you're using it as a coffee replacement, then add a splash. Definitely you can definitely add those things to it. So with it, you'd add it more like you would add milk to tea, so it's that kind of ratio of milk. I mean, you could really kind of roast it up and do more like a cappuccino kind of thing, as long as dairy, works for you. Then you could do that. But otherwise, just splash it in like you would in tea. And if you like to add sugar to it, you can. But again, you think about sugar in terms of, over the course of, a month, how many sugars you're adding. And sugar is very heating, just so you know. So you can decide whether that's, for you, and maybe you just reduce it. Because even if you were to do half a sugar instead of a full sugar, at the end of a month, you've reduced it by 50%. It's massive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question. When you had 80-20 rule,
yes,
that was the same as the 80% full stomach, or that was something else?
They're two different things. So the 80-20 rule is about you know, being good versus being naughty in terms of, you know, drinking wine or, you know, doing things that, you know, maybe aren't necessarily right for your constitution. So, but if 80% of the time you're doing kind of the right stuff, then 20% of the time your body is capable of dealing with that.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. 80% full is when you should stop eating. And that's when you do that hiccup while you're eating. Start looking at other people when they're eating and you'll see it. That's the time to, and you can always just put that stuff, you know, in the fridge and, you know, heat it up and have it for breakfast tomorrow or something, rather than just finishing what's on your plate, which so many of us were raised to eat what's on your plate, you know. And even though you might have, if you're overeating, it's actually really damaging.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's a hard habit to break. But you will find if you slow it down, I think that's the other thing too, you've got to kind of slow the eating down a little bit. Because if you're just like wolfing your food down, and that's actually part of the digestion side of things that, you know, I was saying is, you know, so important is, you know, how we eat. Slowing it down, it doesn't mean you got to like chew your food 100 times, because that's just ridiculous. Like, you're not going to enjoy your meal if you're concentrating on how many times you're chewing and stuff. But if you just slow it down a little bit, so that you can, you know, just take a little bit more time, because why do we have to rush it? And if you do have to rush it, then you've got to find a way to make more time in your life so that you can slow it down when you eat, because eating in Ayurveda is actually considered a sacred act. They say that inside your stomach is a god, the god Agni, which is the fire god, and they say that it's a living being that's the size of your thumb that lives inside your stomach, and that every time you offer, when you eat, you're offering food to Agni, which then transforms that into energy and tissue and good health and, you know, all the things that, you know, good food does for us, good nutrition does for us. And so, you know, if you're just wolfing food down and you're not paying attention to what you're eating and you're, you know, kind of doing other stuff, then, you know, it could be considered disrespectful to that god Agni. And I'm not saying that everybody has to, you know, take that on board or you know, eat and live like that. And it's just one of those nice, I think, notions to be aware of, because occasionally it might float into your mind that, oh yeah, that's right, you know, little Agni in my stomach that I should, you know, that I'm making an offering to. So if you make a beautiful meal and then you eat that with kind of reverence for that food and for that ritual of doing so, you get more out of it. Yeah. So I put a little bonus section in here. I'm not sure, depending, I figured if you're, you know, into yoga, maybe herbs are something that is of interest to you. And effectively, herbs are concentrated forms of nutrition. And so I figured it would make sense to maybe put just some of these in here. I mean, the Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia, or, you know, kind of herbal dispensary, if you like, is enormous. But there's just a few. I think I just put 5 in here that I thought could be relevant. These are the ones that I sell a lot of in the dispensary, because they help to overcome a lot of really common ailments that a lot of people are suffering from. First one is called Shank Pushpi. That's what it looks like on the right. Absolutely beautiful looking herb. Gets dried up, gets pounded up, and so what you end up with is like a kind of grassy looking powder. And we then put that into capsules for people. But Shank Pushpi is incredible for people that suffer with anxiety. Also for people that struggle to sleep. So the 2 times that we generally will dispense this herb is for, people that are suffering with anxiety. It just takes the edges off. So you can take a morning dose that helps take the edges off during the day if you find yourself feeling really anxious during the day, and you can take an evening dose to help you go to sleep. So Shank Pushpi in and of itself does have a slight sedative action. So getting the dosage right is really important. And of all the herbs, Shank Pushpi is really individual specific. So everyone's a bit different in terms of how many Shank Pushpi they need to have. Some people that are kind of bigger types that are maybe, you know, less sensitive to herbs might have 3 before going to bed, right? Other people, that would knock them out for days, right? So you've got to get the dosage right for yourself. 1 in the morning can take the edges off. 1 or 2 in the morning, depending on the person, can take the edges off during the day. You know, 1, 2, 3 at night, depending on the individual, can help the person to sleep at night. Shank Pushpi can also be, and often we will prescribe it with valerian, which is a fairly well-known in the West sedative herb, because Shank Pushpi, despite being a sedative itself, also amplifies the sedative action of other herbs or other drugs. And so by putting it with valerian at night, it can really help people that are struggling with insomnia. And insomnia is absolutely debilitating for people that struggle with that. So there is hope for people that are struggling with that, whether that's yourself or somebody that you know. This could be a really interesting option for them. Same if you know someone that's really struggling with anxiety. This is a really good option. There are other herbs as well that can be very helpful for anxiety if Shankpushpi is not the right one. Shankpushpi tends to be quite light in terms of those qualities we were looking at. So if you're a Vata person, ashwagandha can be a better option for Vata people suffering with anxiety because it's heavy and it's grounding by nature. And so we can talk about that, but this is obviously why, you know, coming in for individual kind of discussions is better than just buying something online yourself, trying to guess what's going to be right for you. Guduchi, this is another amazing herb. This is one of my personal favorite herbs. This rejuvenates the liver, right? So your liver has to deal with everything that goes inside your body and everything that goes on your body, right? Any creams you apply, sunscreens, moisturizers, deodorants, perfumes, hair dyes, everything, as well as everything you eat, has to be filtered by the liver, right? That's a big job for the liver, and it does it day in, day out for the course of your whole life. But how often do we do anything? How often do we give back to the liver, right? We pretty much don't, mostly because we don't know how to. Guduchi is the give back to the liver. It rejuvenates the liver. So if the liver's been damaged through either recreational or drug use, you know, pharmaceutical drug use or recreational drug use, through alcohol, through you know, all those other things I talked about in terms of hair dyes and, you know, skin moisturizers and all that kind of stuff, the liver can really benefit from taking Guduchi, which helps it to rejuvenate. Beautiful herb. Shatavari. In English, the name Shatavari means woman with 100 husbands. And I prescribed this herb to quite a few women that were struggling with fertility. And I would say it's got a pretty high strike rate for falling pregnant off the back of that. So it's not the only time it's indicated. It's also good where there's excess heat. And so for menopausal kind of flushing, that kind of stuff, the dryness that can come along with that. It can boost estrogen in the body. And so, you know, oftentimes women will, you know, report that their breasts kind of grow bigger when they take Shatavari and things, which for some women they love and other women they don't want that. But Shatavari is a beautiful herb. It can increase sperm count in men. So if the reason for fertility challenges is actually, you know, with the male, then Shatavari increases the sperm count. So it's an incredible herb. But if you are taking it, you do need to be careful that you're mindful that it does increase fertility. And, you know, if you're having kind of, you know, I guess, spontaneous sex and you're not looking to fall pregnant, be mindful. Shilajit. This is one that's starting to become increasingly known in the West, which I think is great. Shilajit's amazing. Shilajit's actually not a herb at all. It's prehistoric plant matter that is in the Himalayas, so up in the mountains in India. And during the summer season, the heat of the sun up there kind of heats up the earth, and this Shilajit kind of resin oozes up out of the ground. And it's super rich in minerals because it's prehistoric forest matter, right? So it's hugely mineral rich. In India, they collect it and they purify it and dry it out, and then we have access to it. And so it's very good if you're struggling with iron in your blood. Oftentimes Western iron treatments will lead to constipation, is one of the unfortunate side effects of that. So if that's something that applies to you and that's been problematic, you could try Shilajit. It's also really good for virility. So it's good for kind of, it works the gonads in men, so the testes, and in women, the ovaries. And so it's very deep rejuvenation. It's good for your blood. Good for your bone marrow. So kind of really deep kind of rejuvenation stuff. If you're feeling weak and your blood feels, which I know is a strange thing to say, but if you feel weak in the blood, you kind of know it. Like if you're just lacking on a deep level of you know, energy or vitality, Shilajit could be a really good option. But it is very heating, and so you do need to be mindful if you're also having alcohol and coffee and it's summer and those sorts of things. Doesn't mean you can't have Shilajit during summer and things, but you just need to be mindful that it does increase heat in the body if you're prone to too much heat. And the last one I put in here was Brahmi. Brahmi is, again, maybe one that people have heard about. It's popular with yogis. It creates what we call a sattvic mindset. Sattva is I guess the consciousness. It increases consciousness, but it's very good for the brain itself. So it's really good if you've got mental fatigue. So people that have been struggling with brain fog and that kind of stuff, maybe post-COVID, Brahmi is really helpful. If your memory is not great, Brahmi is really helpful. You know, people that are struggling with Alzheimer's or dementia, this can be a really helpful option. But it's also for the nervous system, so it calms you down. It's very good for the hair. So if your hair is falling out, Brahmi is really good. It's very cooling. And yeah, overall brain function, it's a great option. So that's everything I had planned to share with you.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah. Thank you, Benjamin. That was really amazing. I actually have a question, speaking of all the herbs.
Yes.
Every herb that you introduced us, I'm like, I need that. Oh yeah, I need that too.
Yeah.
Oh, I also need that. Like, is there a way you can kind of, I mean, this is probably a silly question, but can you combine them somehow? And
Absolutely, you can combine them. That's what we do in the dispensary. So we custom blend formulas for people based on their needs.
Oh,
amazing. Then I'll call you.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you can drop in anytime, just in Potts Point. You can drop in anytime and just chat over the counter. So everyone that works there is qualified in Ayurveda. You can tell them what's going on for you, and they can, you know, give you recommendations based on that, and whether that's a custom blend or it's something that's already blended up. Like, there's lots of options for those things. If you want to get a really personalized prescription, then it's better to do a consultation, because there will be other things that you might not think to say that are really fundamental in order for us to know, that would allow us to make a, you know, an even better prescription.
Thank you.
Yeah.
my question, last question actually.
Sure.
So because I am very balanced in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, so I have all of those in
Yeah.
my test. I'll do it again though, like just thinking of the current state. But if it's like very balanced, so it's, I think, a bit becoming tricky to apply this food. So
Yes. So definitely revisit it. So there is a scenario where someone's tridoshic, which means all three are basically in balance. So again, just to reiterate, everybody is all three. Everybody's Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. It's about what ratios you have when you are born. And in Ayurveda, the goal is not to get all three doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. It's not to get all three even. It's to keep them in the ratio that you were born with, right? So if you've naturally got a lot of fire and not much water, that's fine. Or naturally a lot of Pitta, not a lot of Kapha. That's fine as long as you stay in that ratio, right? But because you've naturally got a lot of fire, let's say you'll be prone to excessive fire, right? Because that's the weakness of the constitution. So technically we're all three. What we're interested in is the ratio when you're born. Most people are likely to be dual doshic, which is kind of two are pretty even and then one's a distant third. But sometimes you get people where all three genuinely are pretty even. Tridoshic people are fairly rare. Usually it's that people haven't filled out the form over the course of their whole life, or they haven't been to see a practitioner, because, you know, sometimes it's hard to know, my eye's big or small, is my, you know, because as someone was saying earlier, it's very subjective. And so the beauty of looking at so many tongues over the course of, you know, a career in this area gives you reference points, you know, that you don't have for yourself. But if you are tridoshic, then the good news is that you tend to stay very healthy, right? Because because all the doshas continue to kind of balance each other out. So the heaviness of Kapha is offset by the lightness of Vata, and the heat of Pitta is balancing the coolness of Vata and Kapha, right? So they're all kind of help to keep each other in balance. The challenge comes when you end up out of balance as a tridoshic person, because then when you start to fix one thing, it affects the other thing, right? So then you're kind of juggling those three balls to try and get them back to where they should be, and you kind of overdo one, and so then it puts the other one out, and so it can be harder to get back into balance. But if you are tridoshic and you're fairly balanced already, then I would suggest that you familiarize yourself with the signs of imbalance connected to all three doshas. Yeah. And then when you see those symptoms appearing in yourself, follow the protocol that corresponds to that until those symptoms disappear.
Yeah, makes
right?
sense.
And then you'll know, then that's you just kind of keeping an eye on the balance. Because the doshas, and this is why Vikriti, current state of health, the doshas are always moving, you know, they're always moving depending on the season, depending on what life stage you're in, depending on, you know, the weather that, you know, of the country you live in, depending on the house you live in, you know, depending on what you do for work. Is it air conditioned office? Is it a hot kitchen under stress? It's all affecting our, you know, doshic balance all the time.
Yeah.
I have a question. It might be off topic, but what do you think about parasite cleansers?
I think they're necessary if you've been exposed to parasites, definitely. Parasites are insidious and cause a lot of problems. So parasite cleansing definitely can be very helpful. There are great formulations for doing that. There are also, products that you can take that create a scenario in your gut biome that is inhospitable, so they die off. Depending on, I mean, I've seen some people with really shocking, very serious parasite situations, you know, from living overseas generally, that has taken years to, you know, and they've been everywhere to try and solve. So I think, you know, parasite cleansing can be good. But just, I guess it's just trying not to overdo it and making sure that you need one.
Like, should everyone generally do one once in their life? Like, how should I know if I should do one?
I guess so. You look at there's signs of parasite or, you know, toxicity in the body. So it can be things like, you know, a really sluggish energy. It can be things like bloating. It can be, you know, really strong cravings for certain things. So I guess, it would be helpful just to, and also, I mean, if you've been exposed, if you've been to Bali or you've, you know, places where, you know, parasites tend to, you know, be quite prolific, then there can definitely be value in doing it. But I would say maybe come in and have a chat if you're concerned about it. Look at your tongue. You know, we were talking about tongue scraping before, but your tongue, from an Ayurvedic perspective, is a really key diagnostic tool, because if your gut's not right, if something's wrong, you'll see it on your tongue. That coating in the morning will get thicker. And so if you eat foods that don't agree with you, the next day you'll see that there's a thick coating on your tongue. If you've eaten, you know, clean foods that are kind of good for your constitution, you'll find that the coating's quite mild in the mornings. So yeah, I'm happy to talk to you about that further if you'd like. We do run a cleanse program a couple times a year. It's not necessarily parasite specific, but it is teaching people how to cleanse their system. And we do masterclasses as part of that, where we talk about digestion, nutrition. We talk about cleansing from an Ayurvedic perspective. And so if that's of interest to you, I've got something just here in the back end of this presentation. You can go to the website here. I mean, you'll see it, it'll pop up, but it's a 21-day detox program. And it's a really interesting, in fact, Body My Life were part of the last one that we did. So you guys might have heard about it then. The next one's coming up in March.
Yeah, I would be interested in that one as well.
Yeah, jump on the website. You can find out more information about it. So there's a whole bunch of info there. And you can order a detox kit as part of that if you want to take it to the next level. Otherwise, you can just follow the food kind of protocol side of things. It's all based on your individual constitution. It's all based on foods that are in season. So yeah, it's basically applying all of these principles that we've talked about today. And I think that's why this program is so helpful for so many people, because, you know, getting exposed to the knowledge of it is one thing, but being able to put it into practice and create those kind of new habits that help you to integrate it is another thing. And so this is a facilitated program where, you know, we all do it together. There's, you know, a bunch of other people that are going through the same journey with you. You get to ask lots of questions. We revisit all this stuff on nutrition and digestion, so you really get a good understanding of it. You get lists of foods that are for your constitution, but are also for in season, so you can keep those and work with them later. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you.
That's my pleasure.
Yes, I have one last question.
Yes.
When you said food are in season, so I'm not from originally Australia, so I've been living in Australia 7 years, but I'm from Turkey, like the season's completely opposite.
Yes.
So how should we apply based on where we live or where we born?
Based on where you're living.
Yeah. Okay,
do it
makes
based
sense.
on where you're living. I think, you know, if this is the other thing it's an interesting point that you raised, because there are certain things that are cultural that you will have, I guess, an inherited ability to deal with more. So, for example, right, fermented foods are very heating. And so we're always mindful of how much fermented foods are recommended in the diet. But in Asia, for example, they eat a lot of fermented foods. And so, you know, because culturally and historically there is DNA, like there's genetic ability to handle that better, it can apply slightly less in that setting, right? And so there is an element where some of these things come into play. But if you're only visiting while you're here for a short period of time, then you don't need to worry so much about it. But if you move countries, then you want to sync up with the seasons in the place that you're living, because that's the dynamics and the qualities that you're going to be exposed to, you know, at that time. So go with the season, go with the country that you're living in if you're planning to be there for a while.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's been such a pleasure to be able to meet you. And